Now it is my great pleasure to welcome our keynote speakers, our esteemed colleagues, Professor Pierre-Henri Connac and Professor Edita Čulinović-Herc. We can begin with our plenary session, and please welcome our first keynote speaker, Professor Pierre-Henri Connac. Pierre-Henri, hello, hi, good morning. Pierre-Henri is a Max Planck Fellow at the Max Planck Institute, Luxembourg, for International European and Regulatory Procedural Law and Professor of Financial Markets Law at the University of Luxembourg, where he founded the Master 2 in European Banking and Financial Law, among all the other his activities he's taking and working on. So Pierre-Henri, please, floor is yours. We are looking for your keynote.
Thank you very much, Professor Horak. Hello to everyone. I want first to thank you personally for the kind invitation to Zagreb, even if it's only online. Also, I want to say a nice word to Corrado Malberti, who also, got us involved together. It's a great pleasure, great honor. And now I will present a bit some ideas here for you. I would like just to make two cautionary statements before I speak. First, I'm think ESG, is a nice thing. First, to be for everybody to be clear about this. Of course, I'm for the environment, all this stuff. But of course, as a keynote speaker, I thought maybe I can be also a bit provocative, bring some thought-provoking points, and of course, while dealing with the topic. So just keep in mind, I'm trying to steer the debate because, we have 2 days of debate. So I thought as a keynote speaker, one of the two keynote speakers, I would come with some, hints of ideas. Okay, so what we're looking at the European level in this field is really development at breakneck speed. Things are changing extremely fast, and therefore it's also very good to have this event to take stock of what's going on, because it has been gone so fast that it's almost hard to follow where it's taking place in terms of and what's going on in terms of new duties of directors, risk of liabilities. So it's really timely conference we're having here. What is sustainability? Because my topic is about the EU sustainability agenda and its possible impact on directors' duties and liability. Well, we used to discuss before about non-financial reporting, and now we are discussing about sustainability. And within sustainability, well, the key term comes from the taxonomy regulation of 2020, and it covers essentially 3 topics which are summarized by ESG. So one is environment issues. So companies have to take care of environmental issues. Second, social, for S, companies have to be good social actors. And G is, the one we are very much familiar with, which is governance, because we have been dealing with this since the 1990s. To this, there are other issues which are also covered by the EU legislator, such as anti-corruption, bribery, protection against violation of human rights, and climate change also, which is close, of course, to environment, but a bit different. So in this sustainability box, there are many things, actually, some which are in a sense traditional, but the new thing is mostly the E part, the environmental part, and the climate change part, and also the human rights part with the new directive of CSDD. Now, second, so we have a lot of change here in this field. Now we have to be careful about one point also, the duties which are imposed by the EU legislator, which are there or which are coming. You have 2 types of duties. You have duties which applies to companies, and you have duties which apply to directors and managers. So we all have to be careful to which of these 2 bodies and entities, persons, we're dealing with. Because some duties will only apply to companies and only indirectly will apply to directors. Some duties might apply directly to directors. So I will have to distinguish this in my speech so that we don't make any confusion here. So if we look at the, as an introduction, if we look at the EU action, well, the EU has been involved in the definition of directors' duties, but usually indirectly. The EU legislator will intervene in a sense indirectly, because when you have directives, for instance, if you take company law, you have merger directive, second company law directive on protection of capital. So as soon as you have a duty imposed by the EU legislator, well, of course, this will affect the duties of directors indirectly, because they have to apply the law. And therefore, there's a risk of liability which is attached. So having an influence of the EU legislator on the duties of directors is not something new, actually. If you take financial markets law, so this is disclosure, it's the same. If you publish a prospectus, you have a duty to make it right. And therefore, some liability will attach to this. I will come to this later. And prospectus, this is harmonized at the EU level. Same thing with transparency directive, so periodic disclosure. So the EU has always been involved, of course, in the definition, indirect or usually indirect way, of duties of directors and liability. Also, the accounting directive 2013 is very clear. You have an article 33, which states that there's a collective responsibility for the directors. So now we are dealing about individuals to deliver the management report, the corporate governance report, and also the accounts. So the EU directly applies duties on directors, which they point. And this is also a development because it was introduced in 2013. So before 2013, this was left to member states. And then after the great financial crisis, 2008, this became EU law, where basically they look at the what's going on at the directors level. So we have here a clear director's duties. Okay, when it comes to liability of directors, well, let's distinguish between company law and financial markets law. You have two types of liability, which I will develop. You have civil liability, what I would call administrative liability, and criminal liability. So these are the ones which can kick in. In the field of company law, civil liability has been left to member states to regulate, to organize, and essentially actually to courts. It's often tort law, essentially. When you're dealing with company law issues, well, usually it's not administrative sanctions. So this can be put out of the way already. You're not getting fined by some supervisor because of company law violations, usually. As to criminal sanctions, this is also left to member states. If you look at financial market law, this is a bit different. Civil liability, this is mentioned in some directives and regulations, but the implementation is left to member states. Administrative sanctions, this is a huge field, which is highly regulated at the EU level. So when it comes to disclosure, yes, now we're dealing with a regime of enforcement at the EU level, which is harmonized at the EU level, which is administrative sanctions, and then criminal sanctions. Again, this is left to member states, except for the market abuse directive. Okay, now let's look at sustainability. So this is the picture so far, and now we're moving very quickly toward more sustainability requirements. So this development started in 2018. Professor Anna Orak mentioned, the commission, well, this Commission Action Plan of 2018, European Green Deal in 2019, and this is seeping through all the text directives in many fields, also with special new text. So you have a company law agenda, which is what you mentioned, the corporate sustainability due diligence proposal of directive, which I will come back a bit later. So it affects company law, it affects financial markets law through essentially the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which was, as you know, voted by the EU Parliament last week. And which is complemented by European sustainability reporting standards. So in the field of company law and in the field of financial market law, we're dealing with a complete new world, in a sense, of sustainability disclosure and sustainability duties for directors. And if you look carefully at what the parliament had been discussing, you also had calls for making directors criminally liable, for instance, for violation of human rights stuff. So I've seen this where people were, some MEPs were calling for having criminal provisions, so this is serious stuff. The trend is very serious in terms of they want to make people accountable and even individually, on the basis that they feel that if it's not the individuals, then it will not really work. Then a last point from this general introduction, who have taken half of my time already, but I will go and then I will hop up a bit. We have a call for basically a new type of capitalism, which is called the stakeholder capitalism. And this also impacts the substantive duties of directors and disclosure duties. If you take the CSRD, you have recital number 9, which is very clear. It says the second group of users of this sustainability reporting are civil society actors, including NGOs, social partners, which wish to better all undertakings to account for their impact on people and the environment. So companies are now being made accountable, not just to shareholders, but to the wider civil society. And then if you look at the CSDD, now substantive regulation, it's just the same. You have calls there to involve stakeholders more or less into the management, at least of these vigilance plans. So this reminds me, if I may, I hope it's not too extreme, of what you had in the ex-Yugoslavia. You had this system in a bit from 1950 to 1992, from a the employee self-governance, let's call this ESG, if I can say so. You had this employee self-governance, which was supposed to be a mixture between communist type and capitalist type. And here we have a stakeholder system, which is building also under the surface. Okay, so let me look at first directors' duties, and then I will look at liability, because it's two different topics. First, I will look at the substantive duties of directors, and then I will look at disclosure duties. So as I mentioned, the EU legislator has intervened in the duties. So I gave some examples already from former directives. And what you see is, since the great financial crisis of 2008, the trend has been accelerating. So you start to see more and more requirements on individual directors in the EU legislation, in company law. So let me give you some examples. So you had the one of the rare exceptions before 2008 was the takeover directive, where directors have to balance different interests when they will react to the offer. But and it was a stakeholder approach, it has to be clear. But this was only this. Now, what do we find? We have a directive on restriction framework of 2019. And if you take Article 19, well, it defines the duties of directors in the pre-insolvency phase. This is very clear. This is company law, essentially. It's close to wrongful trading. And essentially, it says that in this case, you have to turn your duties toward the creditors. This is something you find in all member states in one form or the other. But it is at the EU level now. So for this field, which is important, the duties of directors are harmonized at the EU level. Now you have another example, the cross-border merger directive of 2019. If you take recital 25 and article 86G, there's a proposal there, an option from member states to make directors liable, but it's an option, when the seat is being transferred. And in this case, they have to sign a statement, basically, saying that, in their view, the company will not go bust in the foreseeable future, basically. Well, it's another director's duties. Okay, it's an option for the member states to make it, to operate on the directors, but still, it's there. So you see, it's moving there. Now we have game changers. So we have the game changer is the CSDD, which Professor Anna Orak just mentioned in her introductory speech. So what is this? It's a proposal of directive on supply chain liability, which is, short-term corporate sustainability due diligence, CSDD. So if you excuse me, I will use a CSDD as a shortcut. It was published, proposal was published on 20, well, actually adopted, yes, and published on the 23rd of February, 2022. So what do you find there? Well, you find director's duties very clearly in Article 25, in Article 26, and in Article 15. So here, the EU Commission basically gets at the heart of what is the social interest of a company. I have to say, I think this is not the business of the EU to get into this. This is a matter for member state law. And in the EU, there are many different approaches there, and why should it be harmonized? Countries have different levels of development, different traditions. I don't get the point of doing this, and I had predicted in June that this will be kicked out in the negotiation. So we'll see what happens, but I'm not so sure it will stay. But then if it stays, what does it stay? Well, you have a duty of vigilance, which will apply to the directors. You have probably, this will make Peter Omeloff, I'm sure is very famous also in Croatia, who was a big proponent of the concern Leitungspflicht, so duty to lead the group, happy, because if you have a duty as a parent company to take care of what's taking place in subsidiaries, then actually you have to look in this all the time. Therefore, you have to manage from a distance, which is made even more difficult because in the CSDD, not only it applies to the subsidiaries, but also to your contractors. So now you have even a new definition of groups, which is not just the classic one through capital participations, but through contracts, which are deemed to create some influence. You also have climate change provisions in the CSDD, since under Article 15, you have some companies have to adopt plans to ensure that the business model is compatible with the Paris Agreement. So again, you are dealing with a substantive disclosure. Okay, now disclosure duties. Here again, also, we have a lot of developments. There were first, after 2008, targeted disclosures, which started to kick in. So it's not something new again, contrary to the CSDD, which is really a very quick development at the EU level. The extractive industry and primary forest lodging industry was asked in 2013 through the accounting directive on one hand, and also through the transparency directive on the other hand, to disclose payments to governments. And this was clearly to fight corruption in foreign countries, in third countries. So this was not designed for investors, but this was designed for civil society. So it's to me, was the sign of shift. This is when the system started to shift, 2013. Then recently, you have a tax country by country reporting on tax, a directive which was adopted after lengthy discussions in the council about legal basis and so on, oppositions, but then at the end it was adopted last year, 24 November 2021. And this directive requires large companies, so companies which have balance sheet, consolidated revenue of more than 750 million euros per year, that's huge, that's large companies, to disclose essentially how much tax they pay in countries. This will come into force, I think it's this year or next year. Now let's turn to sustainability disclosure. Now we're getting really to the heart of the issue. Sustainability disclosure is coming. And what do we see? Well, it starts with the banking sector again, which usually is the leading indicator of things to come, with the capital requirements regulation, which was modified in 2019 by a regulation 2019-876 of 20 May 2019. And there you have an article 449A, sorry, it's terms are not so clear, where basically banks, large institutions, have to disclose information on ESG risk, including physical risk and transition risk. So here you have pure ESG law disclosure in the banking sector. Of course, the key development is the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Requirement Directive. I will not get too much in detail because I assume this would also be discussed by other speakers. But what is quite interesting is this has led to the development. So first, the scope of application is huge. Is multiplied by 4. Before, it was something like 10,000 companies, would be 50,000. Every company listed in the EU will have to apply this, even if they are foreign incorporated, except micro enterprise. And even if you're not listed, you have to apply this as long as you have more than 500 employees or 250, depend 500. Sorry. Okay, it means it will cover 50,000 companies in the EU. It's huge. And what you have close to this? Well, you have the great idea of a commission is to say, well, companies, they serve investors, so they have to do financial disclosure. Good. But they also serve the wider society, in this stakeholder approach, and therefore we have to provide sustainability disclosure to the others, and they should sit on par. They should sit on par. So you have EFRAG, who is working, as you know, on developing European sustainability reporting standards. And last time I checked, there was 136 proposals of standards that you have to satisfy. The standards were supposed to be, adopted by EFRAG last week, then was postponed by another week, and now I think it's postponed by another week. So, but they are coming soon, and they will be adopted in June 2023. Okay, I will not get into this, but we are seeing, a kind of new system where we have two sets of accounts, one for the investors, basically, and one for the stakeholders, although, of course, the arguments made to say, well, it's also useful for investors. Fair enough, but maybe not to what extent that's the issue. Now, let me look at liability, which, of course, is always interesting to know what are going to be the real consequences of these developments. What can we see? Here, I will have to make some educated guess, if you excuse me, because this is something which is developing. So I will look at the three types of liability which directors may face with this new environment: civil liability, administrative liability, and criminal liability. And I will look first at disclosure regulations, disclosure duties, and then at substantive duties. So let's start with disclosure duties. And then civil liability. What are the risks in terms of disclosure if you have wrong disclosure of sustainability information of ESRS? What is the risk? So the question of whether the liability applies to the directors or to the company will be settled by by national member states, essentially. So usually member states law leave this to the issuer, but of course, it can change. When you look at the text at the EU level, you have prospectus regulation and transparency regulation, directive, sorry. And what do they say? Where you will find most of this information. And they say, well, the decision lies with the member states. So member states, they can decide to apply the liability to the issuer and or to the administrative body. So here it's a complete mosaic of countries where some countries apply to both. And when they don't apply to both, usually we will only apply to the issuer, which means the risk for investors, for directors, I think is a bit limited here in terms of disclosure of civil liability for disclosure. So this is the situation. Then also you have another issue. First, does the member state recognize civil liability for face disclosure? Might not be the case. Even for financial statements, in the civil case, not criminal case. So if you do some greenwashing, does it, or you lie to investors, does it trigger civil liability? This is a question for member states and courts, law and courts. So in most countries in the EU do recognize, was not always the case. So you'll have to get through this, who is liable, and then is there any liability? But then if you can even sue, what's going to be the damage for greenwashing on the directors? What's the damage? If it's financial disclosure, you lied, okay, then people lost money, this is clear. But if you did some greenwashing, well, maybe the price of the stock drops, but who is the victim here? And how do you calculate the damage? And who will get compensation for this? These questions are untested. And I think they would be difficult. It will be difficult to provide money to people who say, well, there was greenwashing here. I want damages. Yeah, maybe you get moral damages if you're NGO, but what else? So even if you get to this stage, you will get maybe nothing, maybe €1 as a symbolic, gesture. So we have to be a bit careful that maybe there will not be so much stuff. So my key point here is when it comes to sustainability disclosure, we are dealing on civil liability, we're dealing with something completely different, in my view, from financial market disclosure. Where you have many countries who accept civil liability damages, but here, where will be the damages? On the stock price? Well, maybe then if you can catch, but it sends the stock price down, maybe you can have some effect here. But this would have to be tested. If you look at administrative sanctions and criminal liability, well, Financial Markets Directive do allow administrative sanctions in the field of financial market disclosure. And in this case, it can apply to directors directly. Usually, they will have to be involved in some kind of fake disclosure. So usually, it applies only to CEOs and top managers, not so much the directors themselves, but theoretically, it could be the case. But again, let me make a statement here. When you look at the track record of administrative enforcement through sanctions, for false disclosure in the EU, well, it's not so good. It's not so good. So if it's not so good, if it's not so deterrent for false financial disclosure, what can we expect in case of false sustainability disclosure? Well, at best, the same, probably, which is not much. So will the tool be very deterrent? I have some doubts here. Criminal sanctions, this will stay with national member state law. And of course, this is a tail risk. It's rare, but then, of course, if it comes, it hurts. Now, let's look at substantive violations, CSDD, and duties to run the company in the interest of stakeholders. Here, again, civil liability on one side and administrative and criminal liability on the other side. When you look at so you have two different ways to get to the directors, in my view. One, Professor Anna Horak mentioned it, saying, well, they might not be protected by business judgment. Well, this is to be discussed. I think there are two fields. You have the formal requirements, for instance, to have a vision plan, this kind of stuff, which is easy. I mean, if you don't do it, it's like a formalistic violation. You don't make the general meeting. Then, of course, you have some liability attached to this. But people will not make these stupid mistakes. So we'll be left with how the vision plan was organized. Was it organized well enough? It's not business judgment rule in a sense, but again, courts are not so much keen usually to second guess business judgment decisions in views under different forms. Will it be different here? When you have a plant somewhere very far away and you did a lot of due diligence, but at the end of the day, something happens. Will you get civil liability for this? It's not so sure, even the company itself. Then you have to go against the directors. So I'm a bit cautious about the fact that we can duplicate exactly. And when you look at the case law, to make directors personally liable is very difficult in most jurisdictions. I assume Croatia is no exception to this. Okay, now if we look at administrative sanctions and criminal sanctions, let's look at administrative sanctions first. Under Article 20 of the CSDD, there are administrative sanctions. So the system comes from Germany and from also the Netherlands, but it applies to the issuer. It does not apply to the directors. Of course, it's a minimum harmonization directive, so you could step up and you say, I will apply these sanctions to the directors. So this will depend on member states. I think the risk is real, of sanctions on the issuers if something goes wrong. I think this is deterrent, at least to a certain extent. As to directors, I've doubt, first that it will be extended, and then that they will be extended in a deterrent way. So I don't think this will happen. Criminal sanctions, again, this is a big risk now, because if you have duties of diligence and you don't apply them, it can be a huge tail risk. So we have a case in France where Lafarge, a cement company, was indicted recently in September, confirmed by the French Supreme Court criminal division, because they were accused of having financed ISIS, Daesh, basically, because they kept a cement plant in Syria. So this is pretty serious. The company was indicted, and of course, there could be consequences for the directors. So I think in the terms of when it comes to CSDD, we're dealing with a tail risk, meaning if it becomes criminal, then it's very serious, and it can become criminal. So here it's something to be very mindful of. Okay, to conclude, I will give 4 general ideas here. When we look at the field of disclosure, the duties, of course, of engage are large because you have so much more disclosure now to do. But of course, you'll have, firms which will help you to do the disclosure. So you will manage, companies will manage it. In terms of liability, I think the real risk will be essentially with administrative enforcement, because you lie to the market. So the risk of liability of directors will be with security supervisors who will not be happy about greenwashing. When we look at substantive requirements in terms of sustainability, I think the risk will be maybe with administrative, but the real risk will be with criminal sanctions. If someone says you did something awful there, we want to get you criminal. Now, 2 last points on the ESG. ESG is pretty much a European thing, when you look at the world. China, do we do ESG? I don't need to answer the question. What about India? But what about the US? Are they really engaged in ESG? We are starting to see backlash on ESG because of, current developments. So some people have already announced that ESG is dead to a certain extent. So the ESG wave is coming, but at the end of the day, you can see that the boat is also shifting a bit direction. Of course, the ESG is coming, but social support will also be balanced with real life, situations where you have to manage different elements and not just the ESG element. And then I will conclude on the point which was made by the last speaker, which I think is very correct, because we deal a lot with E, S, mostly E, but we forgot completely G. If the tone at the top of a company is good, well, things also will develop carefully. No company with a good governance, wants to be a bad actor, and people will be careful. So at the end of the day, you can have the best E and S. If your G is bad, nothing will happen. Nothing good will happen. If your G is good, well, you have a good chance to get the E and the S right anyway, because companies, at the end of the day, they want to be, have good reputation and not be aware, so not be attacked by everybody. Nobody wants to be accused of, financing criminal activities or doing greenwashing. So I think we should not forget the G in the equation, which has completely disappeared. So I was quite pleased to hear this person just before, because with G we can solve a lot of things with people who are going in the right directions, and companies are not isolated. They work in societies, and of course they adapt to this. You have a lot of adaptation. So this is my concluding remarks, that the risk might be, well, let's not overstate the risk. Sure, a lot of disclosure is coming, a lot of new duties are coming. What will be the impact on liability? I think it might be limited in a day, but when it takes place, can be very, very harmful. And then also, we are in moving waters, situation where things are a bit changing, and we are not alone in the world, and not everybody is embracing so much ESG, and even the investors, they are not always embracing so much ESG. So let's take this step by step, and see what happens. And let's not forget governance, because this is really a key point. With a good governance, good people, well, you get good results usually. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Konak, for this inspiring keynote, which of course raises a number of questions, at least for my part, but I'm sure from the auditorium too. Well, I must say, I've heard on one conference last week, wording that we mustn't be trapped by shareholder, stakeholder discussion. Maybe I can put it also in a way, as you said, we must not be trapped by E and S and forgot about the G, because it is probably a question also for discussion. Can the company law be a bearer and, let's say, making a path to the societal interests within the society? So this is maybe also for the discussion later on. Thank you very much. Please, if you have any comments or questions, you can put it in the chat. And I will now move on with our next keynote speaker, Professor Edita Čulinović-Herc. Professor Čulinović-Herc is the head of the Department of Commercial and Company Law at the University of Rijeka, Faculty of Law. Please, Edita, floor is yours. Your next 30 minutes.
Thank you, Hannah. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all a good morning. And first of all, I would like to thank Hannah and her team for organizing this nice conference. I feel very privileged to participate in it as a plenary speaker. And it is also my great privilege to be in a company of Professor Konak, whose papers serve as an inspiration for me and my research team. So I send you all my warmest regard from Rijeka Law Faculty. Well, at the heart of our scientific and professional interest today is a company and its purpose in digital era. And my talk as to that is organized as follows. In the first part, I will deal with the challenges that company is experiencing while going through digital transformation and how these challenges should be addressed in a business organization. In the second part, I will highlight some doctrines on corporate purpose and try to relate them with digitalization. And in the last part, I will focus on regulatory action of the European Union, through which one of these doctrines will, powered by due diligence duty, will become a part of hard law. It is, of course, Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. So I would like to begin by saying that today we are witnessing a dramatic development of digital technologies. Some scholars even say that the latest technological revolution is substantially different from previous because it is the first one that is to substitute human senses and brain and not the muscles like before. So these novel technologies like big data, smart contracts, blockchain, and other are able to process a vast amount of information and combine them with artificial intelligence to make better decisions. As a result, new virtual entities emerge, new types of crypto assets, new trading venues. And the law is struggling to keep the pace with the development of these technologies because they tend to bypass traditional authorities and by relying heavily on algorithms and claiming that the law is not needed anymore. And between these technologies and the laws, which are of course missing, stand companies that need to accommodate these technologies in their daily business life. So proliferation of these new technologies is so intensive that sometimes it even appears that the physical world in which we are living is losing its ground and that crypto world will take over. Especially when we encounter concepts such as self-driving cooperation, where the humans transfer control over cooperation to an algorithm, or digitalization of the board, where the robots assist members of the board or even act as members of the board. Some technological proponents even claim that shareholders will no longer need a board because they will be able to monitor corporate agents by themselves with the help of powerful algorithms. It seems that everything that was familiar to us is at stake. So the question is it really the case? Well, we have to admit that the power of technology is undeniable when it comes to ability to process information in order to make better predictions. Algorithms could effectively replace humans who struggle with a huge amount of data. However, humans are the ones who create these new tools and manage them, and they are still needed to step in when something goes wrong, because the algorithms are not bulletproof. Therefore, we cannot say that the law is no longer needed simply because everything which is important is put in algorithmic code, as digital experts would like to believe. It is, in my opinion, quite opposite. The law should set the rules of the game, and it should be just in time. It is not too early to enable new industries to blossom, and not too late to prevent corporate scandals. So let's hit the road on corporate purpose. Well, corporate purpose and its transformation, which is in our focus today, has always been a point of concern among scholars. Digitalization, for sure, is very important, but it is not the only driver of the change, because as we heard, issues such as environmental degradation, climate change, human rights protection, which are labeled nowadays as sustainability issues, are really heading the contemporary debate on corporate purpose. Therefore, in our quest for corporate purpose in digital era, we should, of course, consider major doctrinal views that evolve over time. However, if we want to be sure about where the companies are today, in order to see where they are heading, it is necessary to recall major changes in the business environment and then relate them with doctrinal views and regulatory actions. So, as to workforce, it goes without saying that the powerful software is able to substitute the work of many. And even sophisticated tasks are replaceable, like preparation of legal documents, auditing, risk management. Needless to say, robot lawyers already work in banks' legal department. So technology is definitely changing how people work and the terms under which they work, because standard long-term employment contracts have been replaced with more short-term work, which is often remote, as we heard. And the freelancers and the digital nomads are becoming common phenomenon. At the level of business organization, there is a broad consensus in legal doctrine that globalization and digital technologies have led to so-called reconfiguration of traditional structure of the company. Namely, the size of business entity is shrinking. Entire businesses use a model of software platform, and with the decrease in the need for human work, fixed costs of organization, such as salaries and other material rights of employees, are also decreasing. And these changes led some authors to conclude that large corporations will become extinct because, or in particular listed companies, because of their excessive disclosure duties, which result in higher compliance costs. But such a conclusion seems to be premature because technological giants and large conglomerates still continue to exist and function as such. So Novel technologies definitely have an impact on labor force and business organization. At the level of market forces, the pressure to invent new products and services has always been a key ingredient for gaining or retaining market position, no matter of which technological revolution are we speaking about. However, while at the beginning of the millennium, for example, large financial services provider faced competition only from sectoral competitor, today the technology expands the ambit of competition. Because new competitors are smaller firms, often not even licensed in the domain of financial services, but they are using advanced business models. And because of rising compliance costs, listed and other regulated companies might lose their ability to adapt fast. And this could in turn open new opportunities for smaller but proactive newcomers that have nothing to lose. So as a result, companies are strongly pressed to extrovert themselves and to collaborate with these newcomers, outsourcers or outsiders. And as a result, companies become more and more dependable on outsourcing. And this is partly because the technology is moving so fast that a company simply has no time to develop new technological solutions by itself. That for sure opens new opportunities, but also creates new threats. And companies as trusted business entities should ensure that these new technologies, whether created for core products and services or for business and governance functions, are applied in ethically sound manner and are conflict of interest free. So we have to take into consideration conflict of interest in the first place, because it has been noted that there is a room for manipulation or even collusion between corporate insider and provider of tailor-made software solution, even in the phase of its creation. For example, there is a market of tailor-made software solutions for governance, risk, and compliance, so-called GRC market. And when compliance and risk management functions are digitalized, that of course prevents employees' fraud, enables tracking and auditing of compliance actions, etc. However, risk assessment analytics will not be truthful if it is based on unrealistic assumptions. And obviously, we have to ask ourselves how these untruthful assumptions could occur in the first place. Well, usually in the process of creating tailor-made software solution, a software provider will receive inputs from the corporate agent or employee. And that employee might be tempted to influence solutions that meet his or her personal interest and not necessarily the interest of the company. For example, that employee might suggest a deviation from standard pool of data that is going to be analyzed to include or exclude some parameters of analysis and other, just because it might have effect on his salary or reward. So as a result, employee or corporate agent would influence the control of the respective business function simply because he or she influences a software design. In our example, it would be compliance and risk management. And this might have tremendous effect, especially when it comes to risk management, because so-called warnings or red flags should be communicated to company early enough so as to enable it to react in a timely manner and to take measures to prevent the occurrence of the risks. Otherwise, these warnings might come too late and be useless. And another collateral effect of digitalization of business or governance function is that once these solutions are created and accepted by a company, they are generally seen to be very objective and reliable. It would certainly be very difficult for non-consenting member of the board to deny results of objective software analysis if he or she, by intuition, which is based on years of professional experience, senses a strong feel of discomfort about these software results. Therefore, companies need to ensure that novel technologies are applied in an ethically sound manner and are conflict of interest free. And that is something that should be dealt in a company irrespective of its size, whether it is big or small. And the question is, of course, who should take care of it? Obviously, in a tiny little startup, which is formed as a limited liability company, it would be the owner's and manager's duty or appointed expert. But however, in large, especially in listed joint stock company, this could be the task of so-called technological committee or tech committee, which will consist of experts who would be preferably independent. Their duties, however, should not extend only on pure technical issues, such as information securities or protocols in case of cyber attacks, but should also include monitoring of technology-driven conflict of interest. This is, however, just an idea expressed in scholarship, while the company is, of course, free to select to whom to entrust this duty in corporate governance system or scheme. So we can conclude this part by saying the more corporate function or operation is digitalized, the more important the process of selection of algorithm becomes. Now, my next topic is corporate purpose, and the list of scholarship that deals with the corporate purpose is very long. Some doctrines have many overlapping features, which sometimes makes difficult to distinguish them from each other. And some doctrines are still used interchangeably. Therefore, for the time limitation, allow me to single out a few of them and focus more on their differences rather than going through history and various subtypes. The most known and the most criticized is, of course, the Friedman paradigm or Friedman's doctrine, saying that the purpose of corporation is to increase the wealth of its shareholders. And this so-called shareholder centricity has been softened or even abandoned today. And just as an academic curiosity, some distinguished scholars have declared in Fortune magazine the Friedman paradigm dead just on its 50th anniversary. On the same day, in the New York Times, the very newspaper where the Friedman's article back in 1970 was initially published, 22 experts were asked to respond to Friedman's original essay. And many of them said that the Friedman's big mistake was failure to include long-term perspective when speaking or dealing with the corporate purpose. So today it is common to claim, to argue that the companies owe duties to a wide range of stakeholders, not only shareholders, and this is deeply rooted in the doctrine of corporate social responsibility, which is a concept which has a long history of its own, starting with the Bowen in 1953. And since that point in time, the concept of CSR has evolved in many directions. And for time limitation, I will go straight to corporate digital responsibility, which is intrinsically connected with digitalization. Corporate digital responsibility or CDR came into play with the emergence of new technologies as a new complementary concept. And it is logical that CDR appeared in this millennium, because when corporate social responsibility was introduced back in 1953, digital aspects were of minor importance, and because at that time, as we all know, single computer was big as an entire room. And one of the most recent definitions of corporate digital responsibility defines it as a voluntary corporate orientation to ensure responsible use of digital technologies. That use should be socially, economically, and environmentally responsible. Of course, there is a question how CSR and CDR relate, and on this point, scholarship is not in agreement, while some authors claim that CDR is supposed to be conceptually and organizationally distinct from CSR. Others suggest that CDR is just an extension of CSR, like a younger sister. Perhaps the main difference between CDR and CSR lies in the role technology plays in each concept, while CSR gives technology only subordinate importance. CDR is all about technology and its implication for corporation and society. However, in the doctrine, a clear cut between these two concepts has not yet been established. Now, recent developments in scholarship concerning corporate purpose debate indicate the momentum of doctrine of corporate sustainability as a kind of a new overarching concept. We may notice that trend from 2015 onward, because it was the year marked by the adoption of Paris Agreement, 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and the adoption of 17 Sustainable Development Goals. However, in practice, companies still use corporate social responsibility and corporate sustainability interchangeably. However, there are some subtle differences, and the major one, in my opinion, is time perspective, because CSR often looks back and reflects on what the company has done to contribute to society, while as a good corporate citizen, while corporate sustainability looks forward and develops sustainable strategy for the future. So at the heart of corporate sustainability is to do not only what is good for a company, but also for the people and the planet. So the perspective is also different, because corporate sustainability is more outside in than inside out perspective. If we relate the concept of digital transformation to corporate purpose doctrines, it is safe to say that the new one should not be regarded as the one that would dismantle digital, profitable digital solutions. However, those solutions should be ethically sound, conflict of interest free, and environmentally fit. As to environmental aspects, although digital assets and services at the first glance might appear as very neat and clean because of their intangibility, they could raise very serious sustainability issues. For example, energy consumption in the process of so-called blockchain mining is tremendous. The energy spent would in turn increase the carbon footprint. And this could have serious consequences for future generations unless digital industries would rely more on renewable energy sources. Then responsible recycling practices such as disposal of the used hardware are also vital. Therefore, profitable digital solutions should be viewed through the prism of their sustainability. In the last and the most shortest part of my talk, I will address the recent European Union legislative action, which would normatively strengthen the doctrine of corporate sustainability by adding to it its due diligence component. And the reason why is, of course, proposal for corporate sustainability due diligence directive. We already heard from Professor Konak about its implication on target company as well as on company's director, and allow me to add just two thoughts and allow me to be a little bit critical, or as Professor Konak said, provocative. The first one is the question, how would companies know whether they are sustainable? Which legal standards do they have to align with? It seems that the core concept of the proposal directive, it is sustainability as a legal concept, is defined in many provisions of around 12 human rights convention and around 20 human rights convention and 12 environmental law conventions, which are listed in Annex 1 and Annex 2 of the proposal. And because of the general wording that is regularly used in international conventions, directors might face difficulties when trying to detect what are the exact company's duties. What's more, provisions of those conventions are originally addressed to state signatories, not to companies. However, for breach of these very generally defined obligation, not typical for private law, companies and their directors might experience very harsh sanctions. And as a result of these new duties and liabilities, directors might become fearful and defensive. And the insurance market will certainly grow because there will be new liability risk to cover. Another aspect or another question are the costs of these new due diligence duties. Even so, we may argue that the target companies could afford these costs because of the amount of their net turnover. Sustainability check goes far beyond the respective company itself. It extends also to established clients, suppliers, subsidiaries, upstream and downstream in the value chain worldwide. So a new set of duties will raise for sure new compliance costs. And because of that, target companies might experience competitive disadvantage vis-a-vis companies that are left out of the scope of the proposed directive. In my opinion, it is quite difficult to predict whether target companies will truly embrace the proposed solution, and as a result of it, would smartly revisit its strategies in order to truly integrate this due diligence in its corporate policies. In my opinion, the success of proposed directive depends on the ability of the target companies to truly internalize its goals. At the end, let me conclude my talk by saying that a corporation is going through digital transformation, and it is changing its appearance, size, and structure, as well as the way it competes with other competitors. but in particular with these newcomers that could come even from the crypto world. And as it becomes more open to outsourcers, it has to also face new threats. And one of them is for sure technology-driven conflict of interest that should be taken care of in the company, no matter of its size. At the level of purpose, if we stick to the original meaning of the purpose as being ratio existendi of an entity or creature, it is obvious that the corporate purpose is far away from Friedman's paradigm, and that concept of corporate sustainability powered now with these new due diligence duties is gaining importance. It's for sure overarches the doctrines that have specific focus on digitalization. However, although it was proclaimed dead, the Friedman doctrine is not entirely swept away. It is because it makes good business sense to look for profitable solution. However, selected solutions should pass the sustainability test. So when rethinking its corporate purpose in concreto, the company will need to integrate the concept of sustainability within the boundaries of hard law. Thank you very much for your attention, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, and I wish to all us a good and fruitful conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Edita, for your also inspiring speech regarding a little bit different topics, specifically on the digitalization and how to respond to the changes in the business and legal landscape. So we have now time to raise some questions. So please, from the auditorium, we have some messages in the chat. So please just address to the speaker to whom you want to pose the question, please, or you can just ask, and I think Professor Konak and Professor Čirinović-Herc will be glad to answer. We have one question from Christian for both speakers. So I don't know who would like to answer first. Professor Konak, maybe.
Sorry, I'm trying to remove background first.
It is nice, a little bit more relaxing after.
So I don't know, it was a switch, which I did not control, but 1 second. So what is the question? Okay.
Do novel rules in the field of corporate sustainability, due diligence, and digitalization of company law, respectively, treat different types of companies differently, addressing their legal, economic, and structural peculiarities, or those rules apply a one-size-fits-all approach? For instance, the one-size-fits-all approach has been applied in Data Act proposal.
Well, I can take this answer, this question. There's an effort from the EU legislature, the Commission, to really distinguish between the large companies, which are the one, for instance, really targeted with CSDD, and also the SMEs, because the scope is so large now. Before it was much smaller, has been extended in a very huge manner. So obviously you are catching a lot of, companies which are not SMEs, actually, really always in the sense of the EU legislation, but we are SMEs in the sense of business, companies with more than 500 people, it's not a large group, it's still, in my view, kind of SME, depending, of course, in the different member states. So there's a good first effort to adapt the rules. So for instance, if you take the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, which are being drafted now. You have the one which are being prepared now, which are the sector agnostic, so for all types of companies. They would be followed by, in 1 or 2 years, actually, I think in 2 years, by this special disclosure for SMEs type. So there's an effort which is being made to adapt here. Also, you can see that in the CSDD now, so not disclosure, but substantive regulation, you have a request in the directive about the need to, for large companies to help SMEs, to take into account the difficulty for SMEs. So this is here around, you know, this idea is here around. My assessment of this is, of course, it's good to not have a one size fits all here, because I mean, if you're a small company, you have to apply with CSDD, as was mentioned by my colleague just before. I mean, you have to know about something like 20 international treaties. I mean, how many people are working in your legal department? You know, sometimes it will be just one guy. So this is kind of difficult, really to follow. So I think it's a good first effort, but my assessment here, I hope I'm wrong. My assessment here is, I think it's completely underestimated the cost and difficulty this will imply for SMEs and smaller companies. I think there's a kind of good faith, you know, okay, we understand it's there, but from what I've heard already, you know, people, even the bigger ones, think it's difficult. So what about the SMEs? You can always say, well, the SMEs, we try to adapt a bit, fair enough. But we can take a clue, by the way, on the IFRS. So you know you have IFRS for SMEs, which were never successful, never extended to SMEs. Why? Because it's just too complex anyway. Even a watered down version does not work for SMEs. It's too much. So I think this is in the mind of the Commission and EU legislator, but it needs not to be one size fits all. So that's the first point. But I think the adaptation which are being proposed are completely not sufficient. This would not be enough. The difficulties for SMEs, of course, would be much, much higher from the others. And the others also, it's a huge cost. I can remember a kind of joke, anecdote. You know, I was discussing with a head of legal department in a big French company, I mean, big one. Well, I can say it's not secret, Pernod Ricard. So they do a lot of, you know, beverage. In a sense, they should not be too much concerned with ESG because it's agriculture on the one hand, you know, it's and bottling. So, okay, then S maybe because you drink. But anyway, he told me, you know, he was hiring 50 people to deal with this. 50 people. I mean, you're joking. Say, well, a bit, but not so much. So what? So it means the SMEs will not be able to catch up on this. It would be just very difficult. So their life would be increased in the legal risk for them. That's clear. Whatever has been is being, you know, pushed by the Commission, I think it's not enough. It's not the level of what SMEs need. They need some other stuff.
Yes, please, Edita.
Yes, I completely agree with everything Professor Konak said. I would just say that that was the major factor for the criticism in some terms when this proposal was at the table, because it was said that the population of 98% of companies, which are basically SMEs, are left out from the scope of proposal directive. Unlike, for example, United Nations General Principles, which apply to all. But I would say that they are not, of course, target companies in sense of corporate social responsibility due diligence directive. But however, they would be tackled indirectly because they will be in a supply chain on one large company, and therefore they would need to stick with these rules.
Thank you for answering these questions. Any other from the auditorium, please feel free to put in chat. Maybe it is also worth to question. It was always discussion within the corporate governance in the past. Is it more of a hard law regulation or a soft law? And when we speak about the companies itself and regulating the issues within the companies, within the codes and so on, how we see all those obligations from that perspective? Maybe also for both of you, how do you see it? I think it is always also, and in regard with the question before from the Christian, how to cope within it, because it is also a matter of one size doesn't fit all.
It's a hard question, I think, because I don't know where I read this information, probably in this study about directors' duties, because there are many options how to proceed with this corporate sustainability, and one of it which catch my attention was to introduce so-called smart mix of legal instruments. So to have both sides, to have also soft law and hard law. However, Commission decided to go this way.
I think we're dealing clearly with hard law, which of course increase the risk. And this is a clear political message, you know, it's political will of the EU legislator, that's clear. But then I have to say we have to, for the CSDD, we really have to wait for the discussion in the council, but I mean, it's also official, you know, that Article 25 and 26 have been removed in the council. Which I think is good news, because this should not be harmonized at the EU level. Member states should be left to organize the way they want the duties of directors. Of course, indirectly, they're there because they have to do this duty of diligence, of vigilance. But we're dealing with our law, which makes the business, let's say, environment more dangerous. Although at the end of the day, my assessment, I hope I'm right this time, is the legal risk at the end of the day. This will all add up, you know, with judges. Judges will be reasonable, you know, at the end of the day. You cannot expect SME to deliver the same result as a large company, and common sense will prevail. But of course, you have this kind of risk, and it will trigger also a lot of, you know, expertise that you have to pay for. So it will affect some competitiveness, especially if you don't I mean, if you are competing with other companies. And this is also why this applies extraterritorially. So if you take CSRD and CSDD, the scope is extraterritorial to create a level playing field. Will it work? I have doubt also on this. So I think it's extremely ambitious.
Thank you, Professor Konak. Sorry.
I have a question about
yes, from the law firm Boric and Partneri, so please.
Yeah, when in my view, we should not have really been covered. So that's the other stuff I'm thinking about. We should, in a sense, maybe experiment, but it's difficult because, as I've just been said before, they will be caught indirectly anyway. So everybody is on the same ship. Huh? But I mean, their life is not easy yet, you know. There's a crisis around, you know, they're fighting for survival, many of them. So, I mean, it's a difficult world, and they're not experts in law. I mean, they should not become experts in law apart from the basic stuff, which, you know, so what else could have been done? I don't know, maybe some safe harbors for them, you know. You could think about this, you keep them with directive. But you say, well, you know, it's SMEs, so liability should be appreciated in a different way, or you can do this kind of stuff. It exists in national acts, you know, but for certain type of people, you appreciate things differently, and you instruct the judge to do it this way. So then you will alleviate. I have another example about this point. The Listing Act, the Commission is preparing a Listing Act. One of the issues with this is that companies who, want to go to the market to be listed, especially in Central Europe, and I guess also Southeastern Europe, they were afraid to go to the market because when they look at the market abuse regulation, they see huge amount of fines, and they get afraid. They get afraid of this. They say, well, I'm risking this, and because they're not expert lawyers, they feel that this is really going to happen to them, something goes wrong. So they say, no way. It's like a kind of death penalty. So I don't want to get involved into this. So one of the ideas is to maybe reduce the amount when you're SME. Maybe reduce the sanctions, say the sanctions would have to be reduced if it says me. Take into account we are not dealing with law faculty professors, right? And even for us, it's not so easy. As we have already, and I guess for the lawyers, we're dealing with vague concept, some hard stuff, and then you're asking people who have to run their business to become expert in sustainability matters just like this. It's not easy, and it can have some chilling effect on people.
Thank you, Professor Konak. Well, I would like to thank you for your inspiring and great keynotes. We are running out of time, so I will close our plenary session for now. And now it will be a break for half an hour, and we will start at 10:45 with our first thematic session, corporate social responsibility. So I do hope that we will see each other after the break and continue the presentations. And I do hope that we will raise more questions and have also fruitful discussions. Thank you very much, Professor Konak. Thank you very much, Edita, and see you later on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.